The envelope was thin and crisp, a stark white slash of finality against the chipped wood of the kitchen table. Alina didn't need to open it. The return address of the property management company was enough to turn the pit of her stomach to ice. She traced the edges with a trembling finger, the paper feeling like a death warrant. From the next room, the soft, rhythmic breathing of her sleeping son was a fragile counterpoint to the frantic drumming of her own heart. The eviction notice was the final crushing weight in a landslide of debt that had been burying her for months. Every late payment, every maxed-out credit card, every skipped meal to ensure her son ate well. It had all led to this moment of absolute, suffocating hopelessness. Later, in the sterile, unforgiving light of the grocery store, the notice felt like a brand in her pocket. She moved through the aisles like a ghost, her cart conspicuously empty save for the bare essentials. Bread, a carton of milk, a single bunch of bananas. Each item she placed inside felt like a concession, a small surrender in a war she was losing. The cheerful jingle of the store's music was a cruel mockery of her despair. A voice, smooth and familiar, cut through the haze of her misery. "Alina, my God, is that you?" Alina turned to see Sarah, a woman she hadn't seen since high school, but who looked as if she had stepped out of a magazine. Her clothes were effortlessly expensive, a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers that whispered of a life untouched by financial worry. A large, glittering diamond solitaire sat on her finger. She pulled Alina into a perfumed hug, her gaze already taking a swift, calculating inventory of Alina's worn coat and near-empty cart. They exchanged pleasantries, but Sarah's eyes held a predatory curiosity. She spoke of her life, a penthouse apartment, recent trips to Monaco, a portfolio that was thriving. Each word was a deliberate showcase, a display of wealth designed to highlight the chasm. Between them, then her tone shifted, becoming conspiratorial. She leaned in, her voice dropping. "You look tired, Alina. The world is brutal for single mothers, isn't it?" Sarah's eyes, sharp and assessing, didn't miss the way Alina flinched. "It doesn't have to be this hard, you know. There are opportunities, fast ways to change your circumstances. Risky, of course. But sometimes, when you're backed into a corner, risk is the only door left to open." The words hung in the air between them, toxic and seductive. Alina felt a jolt, a mixture of revulsion and a desperate, traitorous flicker of hope. The memory of the eviction notice burned in her mind, superimposed over the image of her son's trusting face. Sarah watched her internal struggle, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. She didn't elaborate, didn't push. She simply let the poisonous seed take root, allowing the terrifying, tantalizing idea of a way out to fester in the fertile ground of Alina's desperation. The offer, vague and ominous, lingered long after Sarah had glided away, leaving Alina standing alone in the fluorescent glare, torn between the safe, certain ruin of her current path and the terrifying, unknown abyss of a risky salvation. The seed Sarah had planted in the grocery store festered for 2 agonizing days, its roots tangling with every panicked glance at the eviction notice on Alina's fridge. When Sarah's text finally arrived, a simple address and a time, Alina's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone. The address led her to a part of the city she never visited, a district of converted warehouses where shadows clung to the brickwork and the air smelled of distant industry and decay. The bar, called the Rusty Nail, was tucked down a narrow alley, its windows frosted and uninviting. Inside, the light was a dull, amber glow, absorbed by dark wood and scarred leather. It was the kind of place where conversations were swallowed by the low hum of a vintage jukebox, and privacy was given. Sarah was already there, nestled in a high-backed booth in the farthest corner, a half-finished glass of red wine looking like a bloodstain on the polished table. She didn't smile as Alina slid in opposite her, just gave a slow, appraising nod. For a long moment they sat in silence, the unspoken tension of physical presence in the booth. Sarah finally leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her gaze intense and unblinking. She spoke in a low, measured monotone, the words devoid of their previous playful ambiguity. She laid out the plan with the cold precision of a surgeon making an incision. The target was a man named Mr. Black, a businessman, she said, the term dripping with venomous contempt. A man who had built his fortune on the broken backs of others, a man so corrupt he kept his ill-gotten gains not in a bank, but in a custom-made safe in his home study. Alina felt the blood drain from her face. The word safe echoed in her mind, a vault door slamming shut on any semblance of normalcy. This wasn't some vague opportunity, this was a blueprint for a felony. Her first instinct was a visceral recoil, a desperate need to flee this dim booth and the madness being proposed. She started to shake her head, a protest forming on her lips about her son, about prison, about the sheer insanity of it all. But Sarah was ready. She saw the horror and exploited it, twisting it into temptation. She named a figure, a sum of money so vast it was abstract, a number Alina associated with lottery wins and movie plots. She painted a picture with that number, a life without debt, a safe home in a good school district, security, peace. She spoke of the eviction notice, of the fear in Alina's eyes at the grocery store, of the quiet sacrifices for a child who deserved more. She wasn't just offering money, she was offering a lifeline, a chance to reclaim a future that was being stolen from her day by day. Alina's resistance crumbled, not with a bang, but with a slow, sickening erosion. The terrifying image of the heist was now juxtaposed with the even more terrifying image of her and her son on the street. Sarah's words were a siren's call, amplifying every whispered doubt, every late-night fear. She made the risk feel not just necessary but righteous, a theft from a thief, a rebalancing of the scales. Alina looked down at her own hands, clenched tightly in her lap. She thought of the weight of a stack of bills, the sheer physical heft of that freedom. The moral line she had always drawn for herself blurred, then vanished, erased by the stark, brutal arithmetic of survival. She didn't speak, she didn't nod, but when she finally lifted her gaze to meet Sarah's, the silent, terrified agreement was written plainly in her eyes. The decision was made. She was in. The air in the abandoned textile loft was thick with the ghosts of industry and the sharp scent of Sarah's ambition. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light that cut through grimy windows, illuminating a space that felt both vast and claustrophobic. Alina stood nervously by a rusted loom, her heart a frantic bird beating against her ribs. This was no longer a theoretical discussion in a shadowy bar. This was the grim, tangible beginning of the crime she had agreed to commit. Sarah arrived first, her presence a disruption of the dusty silence. She moved with a predator's grace, unrolling a set of architectural blueprints onto a large, scarred work table. Before Alina could form a question, a second figure emerged from the deeper shadows of the loft. She was a woman of severe angles and stillness, her posture rigid, her dark hair pulled back in a ruthlessly tight bun. She wore a tailored gray pantsuit that seemed out of place in the derelict setting, and her eyes, the color of flint, scanned the room before settling on Alina with an unnerving, analytical coldness. "Alina, this is Maya," Sarah said, her tone brisk and businesslike. "She's our key to the safe," Maya offered. No smile, no handshake. She merely gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, her gaze lingering on Alina for a moment too long, as if assessing a potential liability. Sarah explained that Maya was a former accountant, one of the best, until her career was systematically destroyed by Mr. Black in a corporate takeover that left her professionally blacklisted and personally ruined. The grudge she held was not a hot, fiery thing, but something cold and hardened, a shard of ice in her core that had been waiting years for an opportunity like this. As Sarah spread the blueprints, detailing the layout of Mr. Black's penthouse and the location of the study, Maya remained silent, her arms crossed. She only spoke when the conversation turned to the safe itself, and then her voice was as clipped and precise as her appearance. She described the model, its locking mechanism, its potential vulnerabilities, with a dispassionate expertise that was both impressive and chilling. She had done her homework, possessing knowledge that went far beyond public record, hinting at a deep, personal history with her target. Tensions flared immediately as roles were assigned. Sarah, with her social grace and connections, would secure their invitations to the party and act as the primary lookout. Maya, with her technical knowledge, would handle the safe. Alina's role was the vaguest, and she felt the most dangerous. She was to be the distraction, the one to create noise and draw eyes away from the study, a role that felt like being offered up as sacrificial bait. "It's the most logical division of labor," Maya stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Her eyes flickered over Alina's anxious face. "You have the face for it, innocent, unassuming. People won't suspect you of having an agenda." The comment was delivered without malice, as a simple statement of fact, but it felt like an indictment. Alina sensed a wall of secrecy around Maya, a fortress of control that betrayed nothing of the woman beneath the severe exterior. Every interaction was transactional, devoid of the human connection that might have fostered trust. Alina watched Maya trace the path to the study on the blueprint, her fingers steady and sure, and a cold dread pooled in her stomach. This woman was driven by a vendetta Alina didn't fully understand, her motives locked away as tightly as the safe they intended to crack. In that dust-filled loft, surrounded by the blueprints of their crime, Alina wondered not if they could pull it off, but if the most immediate danger was standing right beside her, cloaked in a razor-sharp suit and a history of silent, calculated rage. Silk and secrets were the currency of the evening. The penthouse was a monument to wealth, a sprawling glass and marble cage suspended above the glittering city. Crystal chandeliers scattered light like shattered diamonds across a sea of polished floors and tailored suits. The air hummed with the low, self-satisfied murmur of them. Powerful, a symphony of clinking glasses and soft, calculated laughter. Alina moved through the throng, a ghost in a borrowed black dress that felt both too tight and impossibly loose, the fabric a constant, whispering reminder of her intrusion. The single glass of champagne in her hand was a prop, its bubbles like needles against her throat. Every smile she forced felt like a crack in her composure. Every casual glance from a stranger a potential accusation. Across the room, Sarah was a different creature entirely. She was in her element, a social predator weaving through the crowd with effortless grace. She was a splash of crimson silk, her laughter a bright, ringing sound that drew people in. She was the perfect conductor of their chaotic orchestra, her eyes constantly scanning, calculating, subtly herding clusters of guests away from the western wing, away from the heavy, carved door that led to Mr. Black's private study. Her performance was a masterpiece of misdirection, a beautiful, distracting fire. Maya, meanwhile, was a study in stillness. Dressed in a severe, dark gown that mirrored her professional attire, she was a shadow clinging to the periphery. She did not mingle. She observed, her gaze a laser tracing the movements of the serving staff, the patterns of the security detail, the brief, unguarded moments when the study door was left ajar. When the signal came, a subtle, almost imperceptible nod from Sarah as she engaged a boisterous group of investors. Maya slipped from the edge of the party and vanished into the hallway, a wisp of smoke swallowed by the mansion's opulent gloom. Alina's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. Her moment was approaching. She saw Sarah's second signal, a slow, deliberate adjustment of an earring. It was time. Taking a shaky breath, Alina moved toward a towering, precarious sculpture of blown glass near the center of the main room. As she passed, her hip brushed against the delicate stand. It was a featherlight touch, but enough. The sculpture wobbled, teetered for a heart-stopping second, and then crashed to the marble floor in an explosion of shimmering fragments. The effect was instantaneous. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Conversations halted. Every head turned. The symphony of the party was broken by the violent, crystalline shatter. Alina stood frozen in the center of the sudden silence, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfect pantomime of horror, her face a mask of genuine, gut-wrenching terror. It was the distraction they needed, a perfect, chaotic spotlight drawing every eye in the room. In the stolen silence that followed, Alina's heightened senses caught the faint, almost inaudible sound of a door clicking shut down the hall. Sarah and Maya were in. The party's attention slowly returned to its rhythms, the broken sculpture becoming a topic of amused gossip, but Alina remained adrift in a sea of her own panic. The minutes stretched into an eternity. She watched the hallway entrance, a dark maw that had swallowed her accomplices, her anxiety a living thing coiling in her chest. Every beat of her heart was a clock ticking down to disaster. Then a new sound cut through the low hum, the firm, unmistakable tread of heavy footsteps on the parquet floor, moving with purpose down the very hallway Sarah and Maya had taken. They were not the light, quick steps of a server. They were the confident, measured strides of someone who belonged there, heading directly for the study. The distraction was over. The danger was just beginning. The heavy, deliberate footsteps did not pause, did not divert. They marched with an awful, inevitable rhythm straight toward the study door. Alina's blood turned to ice in her veins. The cheerful cacophony of the party became a distant, muffled roar, all her focus narrowed to that dark hallway. She saw the study door handle twist, a glint of polished brass in the ambient light, and then the door swung inward, revealing the silhouette of a large, broad-shouldered man, Mr. Black. He stood on the threshold, his frame blocking the light from within, his presence an earthquake that shattered their fragile plan. Inside the study, the scene was one of frozen guilt. Sarah was crouched by the open mouth of the safe, stacks of banded cash littering the floor around her like fallen bricks. Maya was a statue by the desk, her tools held stiffly in her hands. For a single, suspended second, the world held its breath. Then Mr. Black's bellow of rage shattered the silence, a raw, guttural sound that promised violence. He surged into the room, his face a contorted mask of fury, his hand already reaching for the phone on his desk. What happened next unfolded with a brutal, shocking speed that seared itself into Alina's memory. Sarah didn't freeze, she didn't plead. She moved with the fluid, terrifying efficiency of a predator. As Mr. Black's attention locked on the phone, she rose from her crouch in one smooth motion, her hand closing around the base of a heavy, bronze statue of a falcon that sat on a nearby pedestal. It was an artifact of his own ego, cold and solid in her grip. She swung it in a short, savage arc. The impact was a sickening, wet thud that seemed to swallow all other sound. Mr. Black staggered, a grunt of surprise and pain escaping his lips before his eyes rolled back and he crumpled to the Persian rug, a dark, spreading stain already blooming at his temple. The silence that followed was louder than the scream trapped in Alina's throat. She stood paralyzed in the doorway, her hand clamped over her mouth, the taste of bile sharp on her tongue. She stared at the still form on the floor, the grotesque angle of his head at the statue, now a murder weapon, still held loosely in Sarah's hand. This was no longer a theft, it was a slaughter. Sarah's breath was coming in quick, controlled pants, but her face was a chilling mask of calm. There was no horror in her eyes, no shock, only a grim, practical focus. "Grab the money," she commanded, her voice low and steady, as if she had just completed a difficult but routine task. She dropped the statue with a heavy clunk that made Alina flinch. The spell was broken. Maya moved first, her accountant's efficiency taking over as she began shoveling stacks of cash into the waiting duffel bags with robotic speed. Alina stumbled forward on numb legs, her hands trembling so violently she could barely grip the bundles of money. The paper felt dirty, tainted. She kept her eyes averted from the body, but its presence was a cold weight in the room, a new and permanent tenant in the nightmare of her conscience. Within 60 seconds, the safe was empty and the bags were full. Sarah gave the room one last, sweeping glance, her eyes passing over Mr. Black's body without a flicker of emotion. "Let's go, now." They slipped back into the hallway, leaving the door ajar, the scene of the crime a silent, damning tableau behind. Them, the escape was a blur of adrenaline and terror, a frantic rush through service corridors and down fire escapes, the weight of the money and the memory of the violence dragging at their heels. They burst out into a cold, indifferent alley, the sounds of the party now a distant echo. As they hurried toward the waiting getaway car, Alina risked a glance at Sarah. She walked with a purposeful stride, her jaw set, her eyes already scanning for the next threat, the next step. There was no tremor in her hands, no trace of the soul-shattering shock that was currently turning Alina's own insides to liquid. This calm, this chilling efficiency in the immediate aftermath of taking a life, it wasn't the reaction of a desperate friend pushed to the brink. It felt practiced. It felt like the reaction of someone who had known, on some level, that the heist would end not just in theft, but in blood. And in that terrible, clarifying moment, Alina's fear of being caught was eclipsed by a new look. Profound terror, the dawning, sickening certainty that she had been a pawn in a game whose rules she had never understood, and that the real trap had just been sprung. The safe house was the antithesis of Mr. Black's penthouse, a cramped, musty studio apartment that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. Dust coated every surface, and a single bear bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock their frantic movements. The duffel bags, bulging with their bloody prize, sat in the center of a threadbare rug like a cursed idol. For a long time, the only sounds were their ragged breathing and the rustle of currency as Sarah began to count, her fingers moving with the same detached efficiency she had shown in the study. The stacks grew, neat towers of paper that represented a future Alina could no longer envision without the specter of the dead man looming behind it. The division of the money should have been a moment of triumph, the culmination of their desperate gamble. Instead, it was the spark that lit the fuse of their paranoia. Sarah counted out 3 equal shares, her movements precise, her face an unreadable mask. But her eyes, sharp and constantly assessing, flickered between Alina's pale, shaken features and Maya's unnerving stillness. Maya had retreated to a corner, her back to the room, ostensibly watching the empty street below, but her posture was rigid, her attention clearly elsewhere, focused on the phone she clutched in her hand, its screen casting a faint blue glow on her tense profile. Alina could no longer contain the horror that had been boiling inside her since the statue fell. The sight of the money, the smell of this filthy room, it all converged into a single, damning point. "You killed him," she whispered, the words tearing from a raw throat. She wasn't looking at the money. She was staring at Sarah's hands, those calm, capable hands that had swung the bronze falcon without a moment's hesitation. Sarah did. "Look up from her counting. He left us no choice. It was him or us." Her tone was flat, factual, devoid of any remorse. It was this very lack of emotion that confirmed Alina's burgeoning dread. This was not the reaction of someone who had just committed a catastrophic, life-altering act in the heat of the moment. This was the cool rationale of a strategist. "Did you know?" Alina pressed, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "Did you know it would come to that?" Before Sarah could answer, Maya's phone chimed, a soft, single tone that cracked through the tension like a gunshot. Maya flinched, her shoulders hiking up toward her ears as she hurriedly typed a response, her fingers a frantic blur. The action was too furtive, too guilty. It was the final piece of a puzzle Alina hadn't even known she was solving. While Sarah's betrayal felt cold and calculated, Maya's secrecy felt like a different, more immediate threat. Driven by an instinct she didn't understand, Alina took a sudden step. Toward Maya. "Who are you texting, Maya?" The question hung in the dusty air. Maya spun around, shoving the phone into her pocket, her face a tight mask of alarm. "No one, it's nothing." But Alina had seen it. In that split second before the screen went dark, she had caught a glimpse of the message thread. Not words, but a string of numbers and a single, cryptic abbreviation, "Asset secure, awaiting extraction." The words meant nothing concrete, but their implication was a tidal wave of terror. Extraction, someone was coming, someone new. "You're lying." Alina's composure shattered. The fear, the guilt, the suffocating paranoia erupted. "You're talking to someone. Who is it? The police? Who did you sell us out to?" The room erupted into chaos. Maya's cold composure broke, her eyes flashing with a panic that felt too real for a simple traitor. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're going to get us all killed." Sarah was on her feet now, her body positioned between them. Gaze darting from one to the other, reassessing the battlefield. The neat stacks of money were forgotten. The alliance fractured into jagged, hostile pieces. Accusations flew, sharp and venomous, each woman seeing a betrayer in the other's eyes. Threats were exchanged not in shouts, but in low, venomous hisses, promises of mutual destruction if anyone stepped out of line. Money, the freedom it was supposed to represent, now sat between them as a monument to their mutual distrust. The glue of their partnership dissolved into the toxic air of the safe house, leaving only three terrified, isolated criminals staring at each other across a widening chasm of suspicion and fear. The safe house became a cage of silent accusations, the air thick with the poison of their fractured trust. The money, once a symbol of salvation, now felt like a funeral shroud. Alina paced the small, grimy room, her mind racing over the cryptic message on Maya's phone. Assets secured, awaiting extraction. Words were a lock, and she was desperately searching for the key. Her eyes scanned the room, over the dust and the discarded wrappers, and landed on Sarah's expensive leather handbag, carelessly slung over a broken chair. An idea, reckless and terrifying, took root. While Sarah slept a fitful sleep on the stained mattress and Maya maintained her silent vigil at the window, Alina moved with a thief's newfound stealth. Her fingers, trembling slightly, unzipped the inner compartment of the bag. She felt past a lipstick, a set of keys, and her hand closed around a small, sleek smartphone, a burner phone different from the one Sarah used with them. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she powered it on, the glow of the screen illuminating her pale, determined face. The passcode was a gamble, but she typed in Sarah's birthday, a piece of trivia from a lifetime ago. The screen unlocked. What she found there turned the blood in her veins to ice. It wasn't just a log of calls and texts. It was a blueprint of the entire betrayal. Dozens of messages, stretching back weeks, exchanged with a single, unnamed contact. The language was coded, professional, but the meaning was horrifyingly clear. They discussed the liquidation of a problematic partner, the acquisition of assets, and the framing of viable fall guys. Mr. Black wasn't just the target, he had been Sarah's partner. The heist was never about stealing from him, it was a coup. Sarah had planned it all to eliminate him, seize his cash, and pin the murder on either Alina or Maya, whoever proved more convenient. The entire desperate scheme, from the chance meeting in the grocery store to the violent end in the study, had been an elaborate play, and Alina had been nothing more than a disposable actress, her desperation the perfect prop. The floorboard creaked behind her. Alina spun around, the phone clutched in her hand like a piece of damning evidence. Sarah stood there, fully awake, her expression not one of surprise. Cold, resigned fury. The mask of the concerned friend had finally completely fallen away. You couldn't just take the money and be quiet, could you? Sarah's voice was a low, venomous whisper. She took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the phone in Alina's hand. You had to go looking for the monster under the bed. There was no point in denial. The truth was a physical presence in the room. Alina stood her ground, the phone held out as if it were a shield. You were working with him. You planned this. You used me. I offered you a way out of your miserable life, Sarah countered, her gaze flicking toward the duffel bags. That money is your way out. All you had to do was walk away and keep your mouth shut. But you and your conscience, she shook her head in mock disappointment. Now you've left me with a mess to clean up. From her pocket, Sarah drew a small, sleek pistol, its metallic finish glinting in the dim light. The air in the room seemed to solidify. Alina's breath caught in her throat, her eyes darted to Maya, who had turned from the window, her face a stark canvas of shock and dawning comprehension. The cryptic messages, the secrecy, Maya hadn't been betraying them to the police. She had her own agenda, her own escape plan, perhaps her own revenge against Sarah that Alina could never have guessed. Sarah's gun was now leveled at Alina, but her attention was split, her body angled to keep both women in her sight. It was a deadly triangle of mistrust. Alina's mind raced, options narrowing to a single brutal point. Trust Maya, the cold, secretive woman whose motives were still shrouded, and hope for an alliance born of mutual survival. Or turn the tables, use the revelation as a weapon, and throw Maya to the wolf to save her own skin. The silence stretched taut and deadly. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. In that final, crystalline moment, Alina saw not a friend or a rival, but the architect of her destruction. She made her choice. Eyes met Maya's across the room, a silent, desperate plea passing between them. Then, in a voice she barely recognized as her own, she spoke the words that sealed their fates. She's not the one you should be pointing that at, Alina said, her gaze locked on Sarah. She's the one who's been talking to your contact. She's cutting her own deal. Sarah's head snapped toward Maya, a fraction of a second of doubt and fury. It was all the distraction Maya needed. She moved with feral speed, lunging not for a weapon, but for Sarah's gun arm. The two women crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and snarls. The gun went off, the report deafening in the confined space, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling with a puff of plaster dust. Alina stood frozen, a spectator to the violent struggle she had instigated. She watched as Maya, driven by a lifetime of grudges and a will to survive, wrestled for control of the weapon. There was another deafening blast, this one muffled, followed by it. Sudden, shocking stillness. Sarah's body went limp, a dark, rapidly expanding stain blooming across the front of her crimson blouse. Her eyes, wide with surprise and the finality of it all, stared sightlessly at the water-stained ceiling. Maya pushed herself off the body, a pistol now in her own trembling hand. She looked from the dead woman at her feet to Alina, who stood paralyzed by the consequence of her fatal decision. The money was theirs, the traitor was dead, but the victory was ashes. They were not partners, they were simply the last two survivors of a shipwreck, adrift in a sea of blood and broken trust, with no shore in sight.